Triathlon Show 310. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Russ Barber. Russ is the British Triathlon swim coach at the Leeds Triathlon Centre, where his sessions are frequented by athletes like Olympic gold medalists George Taylor-Brown and Jess Learmonth. And in this episode, we discuss his view on swim training for triathletes, how best to develop technique and fitness specific to triathlon, example weeks, example sessions, and a lot more. But before we get into the interview, big thanks to our sponsors. First, we have Zenate that create the Zenate Indoor Swim Trainer, which is a training tool that you can use at home, allowing you to improve your swim technique, your power and stamina, and save time and stay consistent. Consistency is super important, but it is very tough sometimes to find the time to get to the pool when you have to include a commute and changing and all of that. So to have a time-efficient option to complement your pool and open water swimming that you can do at home in a shorter amount of time, even just 15-20 minutes can get you an effective workout, that is an invaluable thing to have. In addition, you can use the Zenate Swim Trainer for specialized training like swim bike brick workouts, and it allows you to work on perfect core activation and streamline with the help of the built-in instability element of the swim bench. The Zenate Swim Trainer also does not take up a lot of space. It is very affordable, and even more so with a 20% discount code that you can get on zenateswimtrainer.com/TTS. And thank you to Roka. Roka produce exceptional quality triathlon wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, performance sunglasses, as well as prescription eyeglasses and sunglasses. Today I want to talk about Roka's range of wetsuits and why they are such a fantastic option if you are in the market for a wetsuit, whether it's a new one or an upgrade on one you're currently using. First, Roka have a wide range of wetsuits from the entry-level Maverick that is still extremely high quality all the way up to the flagship model, the Maverick X2. All of Roka's wetsuits come with the patented arms-up technology, which maximizes shoulder mobility, which can otherwise be quite restricted and result in less efficient and slower swimming if you are restricted in your shoulder mobility. Roka's wetsuits also have a patented buoyancy profile, or actually several different patented buoyancy profiles for the fastest possible body position in the water. And if you are somebody that are struggling with that, then the MX Max Buoyancy wetsuit is the most buoyant wetsuit of all of them, so that's worth checking out. There are a ton of other fantastic features in Roka's wetsuits, like the exoskeleton in the X2 wetsuit that maximizes speed and propulsion by increasing the connectivity between your hips and shoulders. You can read all the details on roka.com, and you can get 20% off your entire Roka order on roka.com/TTS. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Russ Barber. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Russ. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's nice to be invited on. How are you?
I'm good as well, thank you. And it's very nice to have you. Looking forward to getting into some triathlon swimming discussions. But before we do that, can you just introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a bit more about your background?
Yeah, well, my name's Russ Barber. I'm the performance swim coach for the Leeds Triathlon Centre. So I'm employed by the British Triathlon Federation to work with the athletes there at the Leeds Triathlon Centre. I haven't got a background in triathlon really. I did a few sprint triathlons when I was a young man, about 400 years ago. My background is in performance swimming. I've been working within swimming since 1990, and involved, right from learn to swim right through to the last four Olympics, having athletes at the last four Olympics, and so it's been an interesting journey. And last year during the pandemic, unfortunately, I had to take redundancy from my role in Sheffield in England, and but luckily triathlon was looking for a swim specialist, and so I was employed pretty much shortly after that. So it's been a whirlwind of a mind expansion for the last year or so.
Yeah, I can imagine. And can you talk us a little bit more about what the setup is like with you now being at the Performance Centre in Leeds? What does a typical sort of week look like for you working there? What is the squad like, and who are you working with, and so on?
Yeah. Well, it's the Leeds Triathlon Centre is actually a partnership between the two universities in Leeds, the British Triathlon Federation, and Leeds City Council, and they work together, providing facilities and support for the best triathletes in the area. It's been on the working well for a good 10, 12 years. I think, before I came along, there's been a lot of success already. Obviously, the Brownlee brothers and many other athletes that we could mention when it was being controlled by Malcolm Brown and his team up until 2017. And then pretty much what we do on a day-to-day basis, there's a head coach there, which is Rhys Davey. He's Vicky Holland's personal coach, and he was the head coach at the Bath Centre for a number of years, and he's just been employed as the head coach now at Leeds, which is fantastic. And the development coach there is Sinan Osman, that works with the up-and-coming athletes, the ones that have started university at 18, and works with them for 2 or 3 years, getting ready for the performance programme. And then there's a run-specific coach, Ian Mitchell, that's been there for a number of years, that does a fantastic job with the guys there. And then I'm the swim specialist. And then alongside of that, in Britain, for those that don't know, or in England certainly, there's the English Institute of Sport, which is an organisation set up by the government to provide services for the best athletes in the country. And we have support from those guys on S&C and physio and psych and nutrition, medical, that type of thing. Obviously, those guys are not full-time in Leeds, but we have access to them 2 or 3 days a week. So that's pretty much the way it works on a day-to-day basis at Leeds. And the one thing that some people don't realise is we're lucky, we're very, very lucky in that the partnership was able to develop a triathlon centre in Leeds, an actual building that it's actually called the Brownlee Centre, and there's a cycling track there that obviously doubles up as a running track as well, and there's a gym in there and a big meeting room so that we can have meetings with the athletes and coaches meetings and where there's physio rooms and doctors rooms and things like that. So we're very lucky to have all that partnership and those facilities at hand.
That's really cool. When it comes to the swimming specifically, what is the squad setup like? Do you run one session each day, and then depending on the athlete, they might or might not show up, or do they all kind of follow a centralized program when it comes to swimming? Can you elaborate a bit on that part?
Yeah, I would say that probably 85% of what I do with the swim group is centralized. Where we all pretty much do a similar thing, and the basis of the standard program is 5 2-hour sessions a week. So we train from 7:30 in the morning till 9:30 in the morning, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's also 3 additional sessions should we need it. So anybody that needs additional training, or they're injured on the biking and running and need to get the mileage in, we've also got 3 additional sessions. So if somebody wanted to, they could train up to 8 sessions a week within the centre.
And how many athletes are in your squad? Are we just talking about the athletes on the Olympic program or high performance program, or is it also including junior and under 23 athletes? So who will show up at the sessions basically?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of both. So we have the world class athletes in the squad as well. So we've got Georgia Taylor Brown, we've got Jess Learmonth, we've got Sam Dickinson, we've got Non Stanford, we've got Vicky Holland. We've got that group of athletes there, but also We also have a group of 8 to 10 developing athletes that are perhaps at European Cup level. And, you know, a couple of them are starting to get into the World Series level. And so in total, we've got 16 athletes in the group, half of which are what you'd class as world class, and the other half are the step below that. But we all train together and support each other and push each other on a day-to-day basis.
Great. And when you say that 85% is centralized, what is the 15% that is not centralized? Is that what you mentioned already, with some athletes being able to do more swimming if they need to?
Yeah. So if anybody wants to do more sessions, that they can do. So for example, Sam in the group just recently is laid off on his running training because he had a niggle in his foot, and so he went up to 45,000 meters for 2 or 3 weeks, and so he was accessing those additional sessions. But also, you know, there are some of the athletes that prefer to stick to 4 swim sessions, you know, when they're really pushing the biking and the running hard. And so, you know, most of the athletes, most of the time, will do the 5 2-hour sessions, so between 8 and 10 hours a week. And then occasionally some athletes will step it up and do more, and occasionally do less. And also within that group, we've got some of the developing athletes that perhaps are not as physically strong, or they're not as technically ready for the hard training as some of the better athletes. And so those guys won't always do exactly the same session as the world-class athletes. You know, they may focus more on some specific strength work or specific power work or that type of thing, you know. So generally speaking, most of the time, most of the athletes will do the 5 2-hour sessions and do a similar session to each other. But we have got some variety in there as and when we need it.
And if so, for somebody who does the 5 2-hour sessions, the world-class athletes, when they do it in the regular way, shall we say, what sort of distances are we talking about on a weekly basis then?
Yeah, probably between 25 and 32,000 kilometers a week, something right in that sort of region. So most sessions are probably between 5,000 and 6,500 kilometers but obviously during the, you know, if a heavy competition period, that'd be significantly less. You know, we maybe only be doing 20, 22, 23,000. Whereas as we're coming into a more, you know, once we get Abu Dhabi out of the way and the winter training can get underway properly, we'll probably up more near 35,000 a week on those 5 sessions.
Yeah. So let's move on and discuss generally around your training and coaching philosophy when it comes to swimming and specifically triathlon swimming. Can you just start from there, and then we can have some interesting follow-up discussions, I think.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's interesting because, like I said in the intro, I'm not a hugely experienced triathlon coach. You know, I'm aware of it and I've always been a fan of it. And when I was a young coach and just after I retired from swimming, I did a little bit of triathlon. And so I haven't got a huge amount of experience in triathlon. And so this last kind of 6 to 9 months has been a real learning experience for me, and I've loved every minute of it. But I think there are some real crossovers that I find that are relative to all sports, you know, regardless of whether it's just swimming or whether it's a swimming section in triathlon. You know, I think there are some correlations between the two. I mean, you know, one of my first things that I look for all the time is the kind of mindset and the culture that there is within the group. You know, so on my first few sessions, I wasn't really looking too much at the swimming side of things. I was looking more towards, you know, the behaviours of the athletes and how they work together, and, you know, how ready they were to train and their mindset and their attitude and that type of thing. And so I think it's something that, you know, we all really need to look at when we're coaching our groups. You know, there needs to be a real mindset and a real culture of professionalism and of progression and being prepared to experiment before you worry about the hard work, if you understand what I mean. Because, the one thing that I've learned from triathlon is that the majority of the athletes don't have a problem with working hard. They're very, very, very hard workers. And so, the first thing that I wanted to do was to make sure that so that we had that culture of progression and experimentation and being prepared to try things and that type of thing. So that's always the first thing on my philosophy when I look at a situation. Before we get on to the technical stuff, and so, with regard to the technical stuff, the first thing that I was looking at was their athletic posture and their aquatic posture and making sure that we had straight lines and we had bodies that could move through the water in a smooth way. And again, I think that was a little bit of a shock to the system with some of the triathletes, because, the postures that you guys need on your bike and when you're running are often very, very different to what we as swimming coaches want. We want straight lines through the back. We want very, very dynamic and mobile scapulas. We want dynamic and mobile hips and lower backs and that type of thing. And so I had to really start addressing those things straight away.
How do you specifically address those? Do you have a couple of cues or drills that work to address those?
Yeah, very, very simple things, to be honest with you. Stuff like, just on dry land before we get in the water, and making sure that the athletes can lay flat on the back and reduce the lordosis at the bottom of the back. Try and get it as flat as possible, and switch on the muscles and tensing the muscles, and being dynamic with the muscles in that position as well. Because one thing that I found is that when I spoke to the athletes about switching the core muscles on and pulling the belly buttons into the spines and trying to get a real nice flat line along the back, a lot of them was holding the breath. And obviously we can't do that when we're swimming, so it's being able to separate the two, being able to switch on those muscles that allow you to have an aquatic posture, but also relaxing the muscles that don't need to be tensed and don't need to be toned, to be able to breathe properly and still have good mobility and that type of thing. So a real lot of it was just on the dry land before we got into the pool, just learning to activate the muscles that need to be activated and then switching them on when we got in the water. So that was the posture thing. And then certainly in this first period of time that I've been working with the athletes is that we've had a real focus on efficiency of technique and making sure that they understand that going faster is not just whipping their arms around as fast as they can go. It's all about being able to go through the gears of speed, but retain efficiency, and also have a number of tools that they can use depending on the situation that they're in. And so I want the athletes to be able to have an effective sprint at the start of the race. I want them to have an effective speed, up to the first buoy. I want them to have effective back end speed, for the back end of the race, because those are three very different paces, if you monitor them, and also for them to be efficient when they're executing the drills, so they become competent at training and competent so it's not just up and down 5,000-6,000 meters, So it was just basically trying to bring a level of efficiency, a level of awareness of distance per stroke and stroke rate and that type of thing that I think that they're probably very, very good at on the bike and the running, but I didn't feel was there in the pool.
And with the efficiency part then, what would be a couple of examples of how you work on that? Would it be, for example, well, you tell me, I'm not going to lead you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just little things, that I felt that a real lot of the training that was going on was for the average triathlete that was just in the pack. So, short strokes, protecting the front of the stroke, really early catch, no leg kick, very little body rotation. That was kind of the thing I was seeing on a day-to-day basis. And my attitude coming in is, well, what happens though if you are better than that, and what happens if you find yourself out of the pack, and what happens if you want to be on the front pack and you've got clean water? What happens if you're at the front? Because that's going to be my aim, right, as a swimming coach. And so I wanted to teach them about long vessel and a longer front end, and not rushing into catch, and making sure that the back of the stroke is where the real power comes from, linked with the rotation in the hips, and also making sure that as and when they could bring a leg kick in and use it as a change of pace if they wanted to find position, or if they needed to get on somebody's feet, or get on someone's hips, or get away from somebody, or on the exit, of the swim section, making sure that they're getting a good position into T1. So I think it was just an introduction or a reminder to the athletes about those skills, so that they've got a toolkit that they can use of skills, rather than just the kind of standard mid-pack kind of short stroke, no rotation, no leg kick type of thing. That seems to be the norm.
And you definitely have athletes in that group that will be out front and be pushing the pace in the swim, as we have seen.
Yeah,
throughout
absolutely.
the last few seasons.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's really nice to come back to Leeds, because I started out as a young swimming coach in Leeds, actually, and the Brownlee brothers and Jess Learmonth were in my group as a young swimming coach, and so it was really nice to come back to. And Jess was, still swimming there, and the Brownlee guys are still training, obviously, but they're in a different group to the Leeds High Performance Centre, and so it was really nice to see that. So obviously Jess has got a reputation there as leading out races and being the person that stretches out and that type of thing. And so what I wanted to do with her was to be able to obviously maintain that position, but with more efficiency, so she doesn't use as much energy. So, to reduce her stroke rate, increase the distance per stroke. And then with the other athletes that perhaps are not used to leading out, to give them the skills and the swim speed to be able to get on front pack if they choose to. That was a real big gain that we was able to get with Georgia, to make sure that she could be right there on front pack at Tokyo.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all really interesting. And then continuing on with the coaching philosophy still in a bit, what about if we talk about a bit more on the, I guess, physiological or metabolic side, in terms of what sort of sessions you're working with, and then how you distribute kind of more standard endurance work or strength work and technique work with the harder sessions. How do you view that?
Well, it's interesting, because I think, if you was to look at an endurance athlete or an endurance swimmer, somebody that would focus on 1500, 800, 1500 open water, those type of events, because they do very little training outside of the pool, we're needing to get, minimum of 60,000 a week, probably up 70, 80, 90,000 a week in the pool, and try and get all the low-level aerobic swimming, or the anaerobic threshold type swimming, the VO2 max type swimming, any speed swimming that they may do, would all have to come from pool work, which is why they have to do so many hours swimming. Whereas obviously within triathlon, you're getting so much aerobic development and anaerobic threshold work outside of the pool, that I don't feel that needs to be as big a focus on the swimming. Now, obviously it'd be different for 70.3 and for Ironman, but certainly when you look at, super sprint, and Olympic distance, how much aerobic and anaerobic threshold training do we actually need, given the fact that certainly on super sprint and sprint, you're probably not using that energy system. You're certainly going to be in this sprint more lactic and VO2 max energy systems. And then for the Olympic distance, obviously you're going to be going to the anaerobic threshold kind of zone for the back end of the race. But it's not for me a really significant thing. And so, since I've been coaching the group at Leeds, low-level aerobic training and anaerobic threshold training hasn't been a big focus for me. We do it, but it's not a focus. The focus for me is efficient sprinting, is to get better at VO2 max, and the threshold work that we do, to make sure that it's very race processed and part of the race process, and not just up and down mileage. It's pace related. So when we know, what kind of pace we need to be going in the last 1,000 meters of a standard distance, we're working towards that, rather than just endless up and down, up for the best mileage.
Yeah.
And so I guess on a weekly basis, certainly through this competition phase, May through September, and continuing with some of the athletes now, we do one session that is very VO2 max focused, and that's based around 400 meter pace work. And then we have one session where we go through the different energy systems or the different paces. So, we'll do some sprint work. We'll also do some VO2 max, and we'll also do some threshold within the main set. We also do a pure speed and power-based session. And then the remaining two sessions, one will be an over-distance, long, low aerobic mileage session, and one will be absolutely focused on skills and developing skills and diving and re-entering and finishing and all the different things that are important. Certainly for the more sprint-focused events that so many of the athletes are doing these days.
Yeah, no, that's really great to get that sort of example of a week structure. Do you mind sharing an example of what a VO2 session might look like and a sprint session that you mentioned, because they are really interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So with the VO2 max, I mean, when we're not racing, when we're 2 or 3 weeks away from racing, I think we can get a good between 1,500 and 2,000 meters worth of VO2 max. For the coaches that work on heart rate, we'd be looking at between 15 and 5 beats below max. On the actual fast swimming. For those that focus on perceived effort, we'd be looking at 9 out of 10 effort or 9.5 out of 10 effort. And obviously there'll be coaches out there that are far more scientific than me that work on step test results and work on lactates and that type of thing. But certainly I don't do that. But a set might be something like something simple like 24 100s on 140, going 3 hard, 1 recovery.
Yep.
That type of set. Or, something like 350s, 2 100s, 1 150. That type of thing, trying to maintain pace.
Yeah.
And so for that type of thing. So I'm aiming for round about 2,000 meters of VO2 max speed work, hard training, trying to maintain that type of heart rate, that type of speed, that type of intensity. But there's a million ways you can develop those sets, but there's just a couple of typical sets that we might do.
Yeah, when you say there, for example, the hundreds on 140, I mean that gives an indication of a work to rest ratio, or maybe a kind of 3 work to 2 rest or so. Something in that region, just to give the listeners an idea of how they can scale that to their own speed. I
mean, certainly with work rest ratios, I mean, I found it's been slightly different since I've come across the triathlon. But when I was just purely swimming coach, my mindset was always on hundreds. We're talking about on hundreds here. that aerobic training anaerobic threshold training would be work rest of 1 to a half. So if the athletes were coming in on 60 seconds, then I'd set them off on 130, that type of thing. And we was aiming for about 3,000 meters worth of work. On the VO2 max training, it'd be a 1-to-1 work rest ratio. And we'd go up to about 2,000 meters worth of work. And then for the basic anaerobic training, it would be 1,000 meters of work, and it would be work rest 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, depending on where we were in the season. But so I came across triathlon having used that kind of work rest formula for 20 odd years, and the athletes were absolutely just not ready for long rest. When I first started talking about work rest 1-to-1 on VO2 max, they'd do the swim, and then they was kind of stood around looking at me, getting cold, getting fed up, starting losing interest in the set, because they're just not used to a minute's rest in between each 100. And so I quickly started adjusting the sets to give them sort of less rest. So rather than going on 2 minutes or 2:20, which would be probably a traditional kind of VO2 max set within the swimming world, we're probably doing more off kind of 130 and 140. But I don't have a problem with that, as long as the heart rate's in the right zone and as long as the perceived effort's in the right place, then I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I have no experience in coaching swimmers, but there is that old adage of what does a swimmer do when the coach looks away, and it's they go and hide and and skip something. But what does a triathlete do when the coach looks away? They do some extra work.
Yeah, it's so true. I must admit that's been a real welcome change for me, because as a coach, I think most of my success has come in the kind of middle distance and long distance events over the years, and a real thing within swimming, because you're doing 10 sessions a week and you're doing so much mileage, it becomes boring, it becomes difficult, and a big part of your skills as a coach is to be able to motivate the swimmers to be able to do it and to be able to work hard, when they maybe have already done 60,000 meters that week. And whereas I found the absolute opposite when I came to triathlon, that I'm trying to slow the damn athletes down. Just stop and shut up and listen, because they just want to be off. They're just, oh wow, Jess Learmonth, whenever she literally, as soon as the 7:30 comes, she's just non-stop and just trying to get a word in just 5 seconds at some point is very, very difficult. But it's a fantastic problem to have.
Yeah. What about the sprint session, if you can give an example of that?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I found was that when I asked the athletes to sprint, they just automatically went to a really fast revving stroke. And it really wasn't efficient. And obviously from my swimming days, I know that most world-class 50-meter freestyle guys, they're in the kind of 50 to 55, maybe up to 60 if you're really pushing it on the stroke rate per minute. And some of the triathletes, when they were going off and they were sprinting, they were at 65 and 70. And there was just no efficiency there, and there was actually no speed there. They didn't actually go any faster, and so what I found that by slowing down the stroke rate to the 50s with using the tempo trainers, they actually went faster over a 25. And so we might do sets like 550s. First one sprint to 15, second one sprint to 20. Third one sprint to 25, fourth one recovery, fifth one full 50 from a dive, and maybe repeat that a number of times through. So we're really working the alactic system on the shorter distances and making sure that the athletes are powerful and really that their strokes are efficient and they're not just spinning, but then also tapping slightly into the anaerobic system when you're doing some 50s.
Yeah,
and certainly as we're coming out of the competition season and we're going to be going into the general training phase, I'm going to be introducing more of those kind of sets so that we can get some speed, before we go into the big mileage of proper winter training.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of things regarding, you mentioned using 400 meter pace or speed as kind of a benchmark for VO2 work. You also mentioned not really using lactate tests. Can you talk a bit about what tests you are and are not using in swimming?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, as a young coach, I probably did what most young coaches do, and study all the books and become very, very interested in all the technical stuff. And so I went through a number of years of testing everything. If it moved, I tested it, So it was, I did lactate testing, I did heart rate testing, I did step tests all the time, I did all sorts of jump testing, and I did loads of testing in the early 2000s. And the honest truth, Michael, I'm not sure we moved forward with that. I'm not sure we got anything from it. I can't look at that period of time of doing all that testing and think, actually, my knowledge as a coach has really developed and the athletes really, really benefited from it. And a story I like to tell is in the swimming world, one of the most successful swimming coaches is a guy called Eddie Reese. And he's the swimming coach at the University of Texas in Austin. And he's coached over 40 Olympic medalists in swimming, and he's by far the most successful coach there is in our sport. And so in the mid 2000s, I went to visit him with one of my athletes in the lead up to Beijing Olympics, and I spent a few weeks there with him. And on the first session, I turned up and I had a lactate analyzer in one pocket. I had a heart rate monitor in the other pocket. I had a load of stopwatches around my neck. I had, a piece of paper and a pen, and I'm stood there, like Captain Coach. And Eddie just looked at me and goes, "Wow," he said, "when are you going to do any coaching?" And it really, it just knocked me flat, because I'd spent 3 or 4 years developing all these techniques of testing everything. And Eddie does none of that at all. And he's the most successful coach in the world ever. And I learned a real lot from that, he's devised where, he just uses his eyes, he uses his experience, he uses his gut instinct. He looks at the athletes and sees how hard they're working and uses traditional methods like stroke counting. And so when I came back, I really revised the way I was coaching and did a lot less testing and used my gut instinct and was more dynamic. And so it's kind of one of those things where I do occasionally use testing. I think it's interesting for the athletes. It maybe gives us a good idea of where we're at in terms of their energy systems. So, for example, if I have a mesocycle where I'm really wanting to improve the lactate production, the easiest way to make sure that I'm developing lactate production is to do lactate testing. So I'll occasionally do that, but I won't use it all the time. Maybe I'll only use it for 3 weeks, 2 or 3 times a year. There's situations, for example, where I feel that as the athletes are getting faster and doing faster and faster sets, that perhaps we're losing some distance per stroke. So I might do some stroke counting sets, where an example of that might be something like 1050s, where we're going 450s at low aerobic pace, just counting strokes and trying to reduce that stroke count to the optimum level. And then slowly then for the remaining 650s, increase the pace by 1 second per 50, but trying to maintain the distance per stroke, that type of thing. So I would prefer to do test sets like that rather than physiological testing.
Yeah.
But we do some physiological testing. We do the 5-400 step test. We occasionally do lactate testing. We've got the Polar Teams system there, so we can do heart rate testing whenever we want to. But I would say that, again, the majority of the time, I'm using the sets and the rest intervals to control the athlete's output rather than use any results from test sets.
What do you measure in the 5x400 step test that you mentioned? Is it lactate or VO2 or just paces?
Yeah, so the 5 times are recorded, the lactates are recorded, the heart rate's recorded, and that's graphed.
Okay.
And so from the graph you can extrapolate it up to sprint speed, but you can just find the points on the graph that you feel that are relative to the speed that you're trying to get. You mentioned earlier on about the 400 meter pace, and in the last sort of 10, 15 years of my swimming coaching, most of the athletes that were successful, that were Olympic level athletes, were 400 meter, 2-4 and 800 meter athletes. And I found that there was a really accurate correlation between 400 meter pace and VO2 max pace. And so, if you've got an athlete that's targeting 4 minutes, which would be a good male triathlete, perhaps, that generally speaking, given the relevant work-rest ratio, that they should be hitting 60 seconds per 100.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed when I've done that, that's around about 10 beats below max. And when I've taken lactates, it's in what you'd imagine the VO2 max range to be. And so I think you can use that as a real simplistic way to get VO2 max, to know that you're in the right VO2 max range.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I've used for many years that seems to be successful.
Would you say that for amateur triathletes that might be in the sort of, well, for the really fast ones, maybe 115 per 100 so let's say 5 minutes for 400, but all the way up to even 8 minutes or slower for 400? Well, I guess if you're slower than 8 minutes, then maybe it's more of a technical thing, but
I would say so. Yeah.
But it's very normal for a lot of amateur triathletes to be in the, let's say, 5 minutes to 7 minutes for 400. Yeah. Would you then say that, okay, the correlation to the VO2 max pace might be more so based on time rather than distance? So it might be 350 meters or even 300 meters to get to that sort of roughly 4 minutes perhaps that you find with the fast swimmers for the 400.
Well, I mean, maybe, but what I would say is that certainly in the pre-season and early season phases, when we're a long way away from competing, to me it's all about the physiological stimulus, as opposed to any kind of pacing, if you understand what I mean. So as long as that athlete is, in that kind of 9 out of 10 effort, the feel that they could just get a little bit faster if they wanted to, maybe a second or two faster per 100 on a one-off last 100, And so say, for example, that athlete is a 5 minute target rather than a 4 minute target. For me, if they're going 115s per 100 and it feels like a 9 or a 9 and a half out of 10 effort, and the heart rate is in the kind of 10 beats below max kind of range, then it's obviously accurate for them, isn't it? But what I would say is if they're hitting that 115 and those other parameters are not in place, either it's too hard for them or it's too easy for them, then I would just focus on the heart rate and I would just focus on the perceived effort rather than the time itself.
Yeah.
But certainly once the athletes get to a certain competency and efficiency, then I would say that it's a good correlation. Certainly in the lead up to races.
That's a very good point. That correlation that you have found, probably you would imagine might break down at slower levels, and not even like anything like kind of below like really top class potentially because of lower efficiency simply.
Yeah. And certainly in terms of if you've got a big group of athletes and you're not able to do the physiological testing, I think which was the situation for most swimming coaches in the swimming world. There's very often I would have 30 athletes that I'm working with on my own, and so there's no chance that I can do monitor heart rates and lactates and that type of thing. So I had to find ways that perhaps maybe sounds a little bit crude, but find ways that we could approximate those things. And certainly working on 400 meter target pace, working at 9 out of 10 effort, working at 10 beats below max, was quite a good tool that got you in the ballpark.
Yeah. I want to ask you about what swim toys and tools swim aids that you like using with triathletes specifically, and why you like using them, and also are there some that you don't like so much that you don't generally use?
Yeah, well, we really like the rubber duck. Sorry, I couldn't resist it. I mean, a real lot of it's just the standard stuff that I think that everybody uses, So we use pull buoys, but I make sure whenever we use pull buoys that we also use a band, to make sure that the feet, the legs are actually rotating along the same longitudinal axis that the whole body is. Because quite a lot of the time when we do pull work, if you don't put a band on, then your feet can stay flat, and so I think you're sometimes missing out on that important sort of longitudinal rotation that we need. So we do pull buoy and band. We use big hand paddles to increase power. We use finger paddles to increase to feel the tilt at the front of the stroke. To get the wrist tilt and to get the elbow up. We use sponges again to create drag and for power strength development. We also use snorkels so that we take out the need to breathe, so the athletes can just really focus on stroke technique. Because quite often, if you look at the hand path, most athletes can swim relatively well with good biomechanics when there's no breathing involved. But as soon as the head turns to the side, all sorts of strange things happen.
Yeah.
That they're actually using their arms to counterbalance that movement rather than using the hand path as a propulsive measure, right?
Yeah.
So we use snorkels on a regular basis to make sure that we can counteract that. We use tennis balls so that the athletes hold the tennis balls in the hand and rotate the ball forwards in order to really focus on getting the tilt of the wrist and the high elbow. We also use stretch cords, so swimming against the cord and swimming with the cord, to develop strength and to develop over speed and to be able to feel what it feels like to swim at race pace, but without having to put the effort in. And we use tempo trainers, the Finnish tempo trainers, to be able to really focus on getting the stroke rate right, and so that we're not overrating or underrating depending on what the aim of the set is. So generally speaking, it's a lot of standard stuff that I think most people use. With we just add in snorkels, tennis balls, tempo trainers, cords, that type of thing, which perhaps maybe wouldn't be in the arsenal of a lot of triathletes, but and I think it just mixes things up and gives the athletes something to think about, as well as the physical progressions that you can get from using those tools as well.
Yeah. Do you use fins at all? I don't think you mentioned that.
Yeah, we did. I didn't mention fins, did I? And that's probably the one we use the most. Yeah, we use fins quite a lot. I like to when we do a lot of stroke drills, I like to use fins for it because I want the stroke drills to be done right. Because I think that was one of the things I noticed when I came in to start working with the group, that they all had a toolkit of drills that they used, but perhaps they were just doing the drills because that's what they always did, and that they wasn't actually doing the drills right. And a real lot of swimming drills require a leg kick to be able to do the drills right. And half of the triathletes haven't got a leg kick or haven't got an effective leg kick. And so by using fins, it gives you that little bit of propulsion and extra buoyancy, a little bit like stabilizers on a bicycle when kids are first learning. And so we use it for skills and drills. But also we use fins for when I'm trying to get a little bit of overspeed. Again, if I'm trying to get an athlete to be able to hold great technique at sprint speeds, it's good to be able to use the fins to get that extra 20 or 30% of speed, and to be able to really hold good form at sprint speeds.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we use fins for, really for drills and skills, but also for overspeed, for alactic sprinting. We use fins quite a lot for that.
And speaking of the kick, how much do you work on the kick, and how do you do that?
Well, it's a tricky one at Leeds because 2 or 3 of our key athletes hate kicking. So I've got a constant battle between those that like to kick and those that don't like to kick. And so I think we don't do a huge amount of kick. I would say that most days we probably do in the region of 500 to 800 meters worth of kick in the form of drills and in the form of a sprint kicking and recovery kicking and that type of thing. So I don't think we do a huge amount of kick, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 meters a week. But we do enough to make it relevant, and we do it enough so that it's a tool in their toolkit to be able to use as and when they need it.
Yeah. It's generally with a kickboard, just standard kicking, or do you have any
No, we do quite a lot we mix things up. We do quite a lot of dolphin kicking, and we do side kicking, a real lot of side kicking, and we do a lot of flat kicking, and we do a lot of deep kicking, way down underneath the water. So we kind of mix it up. I would say that probably we do 20% of all the different kicking methods. So maybe 20% kickboard, 20% fly kicking, 20% side kicking, 20% rotating. We kind of mix it all up, really.
Yeah, right. Then I think that we have maybe alluded to a couple of these already, but just from your perspective now, having been at Leeds for a year and a bit, have you seen any sort of common mistakes among triathletes that you kind of want to point out so that our listeners can avoid making these kinds of mistakes?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally, again, I've got to hold my hand up and say, I am hugely experienced when it comes to triathlon coaching. I've only been to a few events, and I've only been around for a few months, so I'm not going to pretend that I've got all the answers. But I do feel there's a real mindset of general mileage and threshold that I think is unnecessary, and I think is probably not relevant to a real lot of athletes. And of course, there's going to be some athletes that it is relevant to. I would say that athletes like Jess Learmonth, that has got a really efficient stroke and has got a massive swimming background. She really benefits from short rest and threshold training, and because there's not a real lot we need to do to change. There's some things we've been working on, but she could do threshold till the cows come home, and she'll be good with that, and that's not a problem. Whereas there's other athletes in the pool that their stroke is not developed enough to be able to do lots and lots of mileage and lots of threshold. And my viewpoint is, that it's that old saying, isn't it, that you get very good at whatever you practice most of. And so if you're practicing something poorly with poor skills, you'll get very good at doing that. And which is what we don't want that, do we, of course. And so, what I would say for triathletes out there that are, maybe just embarking on the journey, don't just think about mileage and threshold. Make sure you've got gears, that you can sprint, that you can swim at 400 meters sort of pace, that you can swim at threshold pace, and that you can also swim efficiently at low aerobic pace. And so, and being able to have good skills at low aerobic pace that you then maintain as you go through the speeds, rather than losing your technique. So that's the main thing in terms of training. But and I would just say, the rotation and hip rotation and linking the hand exit at the back of the stroke to the hip rotation is a real key skill that I think is very well understood and well known within the swimming world, but I don't hear many people talking about it in the tri world. It seems to be very front of the stroke based rather than back of the stroke based. And so I would say, focus on, relaxing the hand at the front of the stroke and getting the power from the back of the stroke. So they're just 2 or 3 things that I've noticed along the way.
Yeah, no, that's all great. And when it comes to sort of making sure that you practice doing things well, if you are embarking on the journey, or you're an amateur triathlete and you have been doing it for a while, but you're by no means a swimmer by background, then would you say that like doing a video analysis session every once in a while is a good thing, or do you think that maybe joining a squad where there is some on deck surveillance from a coach, or what are some options for these types of athletes that are not going to be able to or don't have any interest in being in a high performance squad like the Leeds Centre?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably a combination of all those things, Michael. To be honest, I think getting some basic competencies and some basic understanding of how an efficient swimming stroke works, and then trying that for a period of time so that you've got a certain level of ability before you start going into the video analysis. Because I think it's kind of one of those things where when you're first starting a new skill, it's a whole range of things that you've got to think about, right? And I think you've probably got to get to the point where some of the key things have become automatic, that you don't have to think about them anymore before you can then start really, really focusing on some of the key things. And so I would say that you probably need a certain level of swimming competency that's brought to you by working with a local squad or a local swimming coach, or by talking to the swimming clubs. And one of the things that I've been really surprised by over the years is obviously there's a pretty good swimming club in most towns, with people that really understand swimming. And the links between them and triathlon, in my experience, is very limited. And, I've always found that a bit peculiar that, that there are swimming experts out there that are very happy to help and very happy to work with people, and that it's not really tapped into. And so that's certainly something that the Federation are asking me to get involved with, is trying to bring the 2 competencies together there a little bit more. But that would be certainly a bit of advice I would give to an up-and-coming triathlete, to try and work within a tri club or a swimming club to get the basic competencies in place, and then start a little bit of video analysis. But the key things, I think, is really focusing on distance per stroke in the early days, increasing the length of the stroke rather than increasing the rate of the stroke. And once that distance per stroke is grooved, and once it becomes a decent competence of the athlete, then you can start increasing the stroke rate and talking about tempo and talking about speed. And I think if you do things in that order, you've got a good chance, rather than just going at it hammer and tong right from the start, and trying to run before you can walk, so to say.
Yeah. I think what you mentioned there with the limited link between local clubs and triathletes is very interesting, and I kind of have a sense that the reason for that is that a lot of us triathletes have a mentality of our program needs to be perfect. There is a perfect program for us, and whether we make it ourselves as self-coach athletes or our coach, our triathlon coach has made a swim program for us, a lot of triathletes are reluctant to let go of the control of having a program that you're in control of, and go to a swim squad where you don't really know what's going to happen. You kind of want to have it in your schedule already. I feel that that's the reason a lot of times, but I do agree. I personally swim with a squad, and I think that there are so many positives of that, it's definitely something that is worth at least trying. At the same time, the other problem there you mentioned with starting smashing yourself too early before you have the efficiency. Depending on the squad you go to, that might actually happen. So you need to find like a good squad and a good level for you. So
definitely.
it's not always easy, but
no, I understand that, and I think also, the fault is also with the swimming community just as much as the tri community. I think we can be a little bit elitist sometimes, and it's like, if you've got a squad of swimmers that are doing 10 sessions a week, and then you've got a triathlete that comes in and says, "Oh, can I join in a couple of sessions a week?" and they turn up with a wetsuit and and that type of thing. I think, as swimming coaches, we can get a little bit snobby at times. I know I certainly was when I was a swimming coach. I was a little bit, oh yeah, I ain't got time for this, But when I'm seeing the other side, and I'm seeing, there's a saying, it's low hanging fruit, and for me that's very much that, that there are so many improvements that can easily be made for triathletes. That these are things that I think we can address, but I think for me the key thing is to really focus on efficiency of stroke counting, and then when that becomes grooved and you feel like you've got a certain level of competence, then you can start introducing rates, and you can start introducing the different gears, going up to threshold pace and going up to VO2 max pace and sprinting and that type of thing. But I think if you go to those higher speed zones too early, it's just going to be a mess. It's just going to be messy. So I would really focus on those things.
Speaking of turning up in a wetsuit, how much have you been doing open water swimming with the squad, or is that something that the athletes kind of work into their program a bit as a fun thing on the side when they're not racing? Is it very pool focused, or do you have dedicated open water sessions?
Yeah, so we have two dedicated open water sessions a week through the summer. We actually go to a lake, a boating lake, and one of those sessions we make it very kind of long, over distance kind of swimming, so that it's just an acclimatization thing, and just getting 5,000 or 6,000 meters in a glorified duck pond, really. And just doing that, and then the second session of the week we make it quite race specific. So we do diving off the pontoon, re-entries, exits. We do sprinting, we do threshold sets, we do VO2 max sets, we do drafting, and I introduced a term called a disruptor. So in every group of say 4 or 5 athletes that go off, I appoint one of them as a secret disruptor whose job it is just to make everybody else's life hard. So banging into them and rolling over them and chopping them through and getting in the way and doing, just being a pain in the ass, basically. And that seems to be working really well, because I think if you look at pretty much every, certainly standard distance and above triathlons, it just seems to be, that you have a number of athletes that are very good at that, and the athletes that are trying to make progress and trying to actually get on front pack need to be able to learn to deal with that stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do that twice a week. And then during the summer, and then during the winter. So we've just stopped that now because the water temperature in Britain is dropped below kind of 20. It's more like sort of 14, 15 now. And so, and we just try and keep some of those skills that we did in the open water relevant by doing it in the pool, So regular wetsuits in the pool, drafting work, sighting work, that type of thing. But certainly in the summer, we have 2 dedicated open water sessions. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And then one topic that I wanted to ask you about as well, that I heard on another podcast that I can link to in the show notes for listeners who want to hear more. It was the Athlete Welfare podcast. You discussed, both athlete welfare, but also coach welfare, and the topics of burnout or chronic fatigue. So could you give some thoughts on those topics?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a massive thing, isn't it? And I think for for many years, I think we just kind of dabbled around the sides of it and didn't really understand it or didn't have the skills to be able to tackle it. But when I think back to the last 20 odd years of elite coaching in swimming that I've done, and I think about the amount of coaches that have had, to varying degrees, serious problems, mental health problems, and we've even had people that have taken their lives. We've had people with alcoholism. We've had people with mental breakdowns. We've had people with chronic fatigue, and I'm certainly one of those people. And I think we're starting to address it better now, aren't we? I think in this last sort of 2 or 3 years, we are making more of a focus on it, and I think it's becoming less stigmatized, and I think people are prepared to talk about it more. But I think as an overriding thing, we need to make sure that we are looking after ourselves as coaches in a world-class way, in the same way that we look after our athletes in a world-class way. Because if you actually think about it, most of us coaches that work with athletes are very, very good at giving advice and making sure that our athletes are recovering properly and are eating properly and sleeping properly and are developing the correct mental narratives to be able to stay healthy in the thoughts. But how many of us actually do that ourselves? And how many of us are as strict with ourselves when it comes to sleep, recovery, mental narrative, nutrition, all those sort of things? And I can tell you right now that I'm nowhere near as competent at looking after myself as I am as competent looking after the world-class athletes that I look after. And I think, we've all got to strive to get that balance as equal as possible. And I think the people that do get that balance end up being the ones that are the most successful and end up being the ones that have got longevity in the sport. And, and I don't think there's any excuse now to say that we don't know, because, it's so easy now. When I first started coaching, Michael, it was long before the internet, was around. And so, the only way that you could find things out would be to actually make an effort to hire somebody or to go to the library and study books. Whereas now, with a few clicks on the internet, you can find out about all of these things very, very easily. So we know now that sleep tends to work in 1.5 hour cycles. This is scientific stuff. And so we know that for most, people, we need a minimum of 5 1.5 hour cycles in the sleep, in our sleep, a minimum. And we know how the brain works now. We know about how the different parts of the brain relate to each other and how mental narrative can control a real lot of how we feel and the hormones that are released on a day-to-day basis. And so I think that the information's out there, and I think we really need to take it seriously. First and foremost, to make sure that our athletes are being looked after properly and coached in a world-class way. And I would just say 50% of my job is about 10 100s this and 20 50s that, and the other 50% of it is this stuff that I'm talking about here. Making sure that that the primal things that make us healthy and happy are addressed. And we are awful, Michael, at looking after ourselves as coaches. Awful. And if we were advising ourselves as if we was coaching ourselves, we'd be a hell of a lot healthier and a hell of a lot happier and a hell of a lot fitter if we did the same good job with ourselves as we did with our athletes. And that's the kind of I feel really strongly about that, having seen the other side of it, and having been very ill myself, previously, and learn what I needed to do to become healthy again and to maintain my health and happiness, And I don't think any of it's rocket science. It's simple stuff.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Silver lining, I guess, that it doesn't have to be complicated. I was going to ask you about, is this all about just coaches becoming aware of it and taking action on their own, or is there also an onus on, for example, federations that are employing coaches to do something to raise awareness, or I guess set up work conditions that are conducive for longevity and good mental health?
I think both. I do think that as employers, we've all got responsibilities for the people we employ, without a doubt. But ultimately, we've all got individual needs, haven't we? And I mentioned to you earlier that one of my colleagues, one of my best friends, a number of years ago, ended up taking his own life, and none of us knew. None of us knew that it was, that he was in that state. So it's kind of one of those things where no amount of federation intervention would have saved him. What needed to happen, was long before that. Was for him to be able to address the problems long before it got to that point. And so I do feel it's a combination of both. I think we do need to be educated in terms of supporting each other and having environments of trust and support and good positive relationships, but also we need to educate ourselves and ultimately take responsibility for our own health and well-being. And a really good example, and I absolutely loved this, one of the CPDs that I did with British Swimming a number of years ago, they brought in a disaster management expert. So when, say, there's an earthquake or a major disaster, there are people that are actually employed to bring a team together and go out there and deal with it. Hunt for bodies and support the communities and that type of thing. And he said, you can imagine when you're in that situation where you're trying to save people's lives, that you can push yourself and push yourself and push yourself and push yourself because you're working on real primal things going on in your head. You can push yourself much harder and you become much more tired than you would in a normal day-to-day, work or job. And people would become so tired and so exhausted that they started making bad decisions and dangerous decisions. And so they developed a system where if one of your colleagues that you was working alongside of came up to you and put their hand on your shoulder and said, you need to take a break, you need to go and eat, you need to go and sleep, it was a disciplinary offence to say no. So if someone recognised that in yourself, in you, that you were exhausted, but you wanted to keep going because that's human nature, in those heightened emotional situations, you weren't allowed to say no. You had to stop and you had to take a break, and you put that trust in your colleagues to know what was best for you. And obviously, in our world of working in sport, it's not life and death like that, but it's still very, very emotive. And I can tell you, when an athlete comes up to me and says, Russ, I want to win an Olympic medal, will you help me? That's a hugely emotive thing that makes me push myself a hell of a lot harder than I would way beyond the comfort zone and way beyond probably what's healthy for me. And so I think we need to perhaps have a system among the people that we work with and our elite athletes where we trust each other enough to say, take 48 hours off. You need to replenish the tank. You need to decompress. You're no good to anybody in this state. And you're no good to anyone dead if you have an heart attack, right? So I think we need to be able to do that as coaches, to be really aware of each other and to be able to look after each other's well-being in the same way that we have no problem doing that with our athletes.
Yeah, those are all really, really excellent points and wise words. And obviously, sorry for what you went through with the chronic fatigue and the loss of your friend.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
With regard to the athlete side of the coin, the athlete welfare, other than the things already mentioned, is there anything? What is there anything in addition to the things you already mentioned about making sure that they sleep well, eat well, and so on? That as a coach, you feel that this is something that is my responsibility as a coach to help the athlete with regarding their welfare.
Yeah, I do, and I think because a lot of the people that we work with are students, and so they're away from the family, and maybe only see the family 2 or 3 times a year. And the family is normally the people that would be there to put an arm around the shoulder occasionally and give good advice and be able to help them with difficult situations. And so I think, although there needs to be a line between the familiarity that we have with the athletes as coaches, obviously, I do think that I see my role not just as a sports coach, but also to try and give advice and support as and when needed. And so I think being the kind of coach that the athletes know that you have always got time for them, to talk to them and to give advice and support as and when they need it, I think is an important part of the role. But I think obviously you've got to be careful with that as a coach to make sure that you don't get so dragged into it all that it becomes a real burdensome sort of problem. But I think it's just being available to talk to athletes, and I think one of the things that I found particularly with triathlon is that recovery, both emotional and physical, is something that we really need to address, particularly as the athletes get older. We need to make sure that recovery is talked about as often as training hard, and how the recovery skills can be really addressed. To make sure we're minimising injury and to make sure that we can really get quality out of the sessions that we need. I also think that elite athletes are terrible at accepting praise. And so I think it's something that we need to teach them, and we need to do as coaches, to make sure that they can see when they've done a good job and they can feel the positive endorphin release of perceiving that they're doing a good set and training well and racing well as just being clinically analytical. This could be better, this could be better, this could be better. But I think it's really important that we also address what they're doing very, very well also. And I think we all probably assume that we're doing that. But if you actually analyse it, I think a lot of the time we'll find ourselves with the constructive criticism rather than the praise. And I think that's a really important thing. And then the only other thing I would just say is that I think the challenge that we give the athletes needs to be progressive. And, we need to make sure that, we've all got our long-term aspirations. Of course we do. But not rush towards those things. And the longer we can take just putting those layers upon layers upon layers of skill and tactical awareness and training ability and recovery competency and all those type of things, just layer upon layer, one step at a time. And, so it's a progressive challenge rather than, like most of us, we have a big aspirational goal and we go at it so hard, so quickly. We end up getting injured, we end up getting demotivated, and it all kind of goes wrong. So I think they're really important things, I think, when it comes to the athlete welfare kind of discussion.
Again, really excellent points. Really appreciate you discussing that topic. I only have a couple more questions to finish off before, the rapid fire questions, but two more before that. And the first one that I want to ask you is just what would you tell yourself from 10 years ago as a coach if you could go back in time?
Do you know what? I think that's the hardest question. I think that's a really, really horrible question, Michael. But I think probably the mental narrative thing that we're talking about. I think, because I think I was so very task focused and 10 years ago, I genuinely felt I was indestructible. Charging around the world, going to all the major meets, and living out of a suitcase, and living on junk food, and you kind of just think you're indestructible. And now I'm 50, or nearly 50 years of age, and things are starting to ache, and things are starting to break, and things are starting to go wrong. I think probably what I should have done 10 years ago, if I could talk to a 40-year-old self, would be look after yourself better, understand the mental narrative thing, and focus on a more recovery and decompression style of coaching, rather than just constantly push. And I think that would have been better for my athletes. I think it would be better for me, and ultimately it would have meant that it means that you've got more longevity in the sport, right?
Yeah.
Because we're no good to anybody dead.
Yeah. Well, you're still young, so just
I don't feel it, Michael. But thank you anyway.
Just keep taking care of yourself now that you have that awareness, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of longevity.
Yeah, take a few more omega-3 tablets and vitamin D tablets, right?
Yeah. And a couple of those 48 hours off, and every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's one thing within coaching triathlon or swimming that you are currently learning about or fascinated by, and why?
I think it's probably the balance between hard work and recovery. I think, and being able to know how long to push for. One of the discussions that I one of the places I got to as a swimming coach was I avoided the mesocycle approach of perhaps 3 hard weeks, 1 recovery week, or 4 hard weeks, 1 recovery, that type of thing. And I got to a point where I did recovery weeks on need and pushed longer before we did recovery weeks. But I think I was in a situation there where I was working with some great athletes that really knew the bodies, that I'd been coaching for a lot of years. I mean, for example, one of the double Olympians that I coached, a girl called Ellie Faulkner, went to London Olympics and Rio Olympics, Commonwealth medalist, great swimmer. And I coached her from the age of 8. She came from swimming lessons in 2002, and I coached her right through to 2018. So I coached her for 16, 17 years. And so I knew her well enough to be able to do that recovery on need approach, whereas some of the other athletes that perhaps I didn't know that well, and perhaps maybe weren't as reflective in their own training to give you good feedback as to where they were at, in terms of fatigue. So I think that whole model of 3 and 1, or 2 and 1, or 2 and 1, or 5 and 2, or whatever it is that you want to look at, I'm really intrigued by that right now. And I haven't got any answers, Michael, I'm afraid. But one thing I do know is that I think it needs to be looked at, and I think if you was to look at the needs of a Vicky Holland in her mid-30s, and look at the needs of an athlete that maybe in their early 20s, they're really going to need the same planning and the same mesocycles and macrocycles and microcycles and that type of thing. And so I think it's being able to individualize that and get it right, and that's what's really, I'm really kind of enjoying that challenge right now.
Yeah, no, that is a very, very fascinating topic. Absolutely. And let me know when you have the answers, because I'm also curious to hear about.
Mate, that one's going to be a book. I'll make a little bit of money out of that one if I find an answer.
Yeah. Well, let's finish up with the rapid fire questions. So take just one sentence to answer each of these. And the first one is, what is your favorite book or resource?
Oh, mate, my favorite book is an old one by Doc Counsilman, Doc Counsilman was the swimming coach at Indiana University in the 50s and 60s and 70s in America. And he was Mark Spitz's coach, which was the kind of Michael Phelps of the 70s, right? And but he moved the sport on massively with his coaching and his studying and his just everything about the guy was fantastic. And he wrote a book in 1968 called The Science of Swimming, and then updated it in 1977. It's the Competitive Swimming Manual for Swimmers and Coaches. And those two books, for me, whenever I'm lost, whenever I kind of am scrabbling for ideas, he just puts me straight again. He's just got it right. And so that's the one that I would, I think the advice on front crawl in there is still relevant. I think for swimming coaches, probably, the backstroke, breaststroke, and maybe the butterfly maybe isn't quite so relevant 40 years on, 50 years on. But certainly the front crawl, I don't think anything's changed really from the stuff that Doc was talking about in the 60s and 70s. And certainly in terms of how we should be as a coach and the culture that we're creating with our athletes and the planning stuff and all that type of stuff. Doc had it right in the 60s and 70s, and I just go back to those books. Fantastic.
Great. And what's an important habit that you've benefited from athletically, professionally, or personally?
Well, again, I think this comes from Eddie, the Eddie Reese, the guy I was talking to you about, the coach at the University of Texas. After I'd spent some time there, when I was coming to the end of my time there, I asked his advice and I said, Eddie, what do you think I should work on? What can I work on to get better as a coach? And he said, Russ, you're a really powerful individual. You've got real strong presence and it can be quite overwhelming, and learn to not use that power. And at the time, as a young coach, I was in my 20s at that point, or my early 30s, certainly. And so him saying that to me, was a real eye-opener, in terms of use it like salt and pepper. Use your strength as a coach and your power and your influence as a coach really sparingly, and work with the athletes to bring the best out of themselves so they're more self-driven rather than me being the big guy at the front of the ship charging everybody on like a Viking warrior, Yeah. And so I think that was probably one of the best bits of advice I got, and I certainly changed my coaching approach to be much more integral with the athlete rather than me just being a leader.
And who's somebody that you look up to or that has inspired you?
Oh, wow. Again, that's a really tricky one. In the short time I've been in triathlon, I've worked really closely with Ben Bright, who's obviously was the GB Olympic head coach for Tokyo, and I really enjoyed working with him in the lead up to Tokyo, and really looked up to him and respected him in that role. Learned a real lot from him, and so and also over the years I've got to know Robin Brew really well, who obviously is still involved, but he was one of the very first elite triathletes that I knew, 20, 25, maybe even 30 years ago. And, he's gone on to coach a good level, and I really look up to him, certainly within the sport of triathlon. And probably outside of triathlon, the big two names for me are Bill Sweetenham, who was our performance director in Britain up until 2007, and it was just a mind explosion for me working with that guy. And he brought in all the kind of coaching methods from all over the world and just expanded our knowledge massively within Britain. And to be fair, the success that we're seeing in swimming right now in Britain is probably on the back of the stuff that Bill brought in the early 2000s. And then the probably the last one would be Terry Dennison, who was my boss at City of Leeds Swimming Club in the 90s. I learned so much from that guy, and so much of what I talk about these days, about the cultures and the mindsets and the behaviours of athletes, I certainly learned from Terry back in those days. So they're probably two or three people that I really am inspired by and look up to right now.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And finally, tell the listeners if they're interested in following you, or do you have any presence on social media or so, Twitter or something like that? Or
yeah, I mean, I've got bits and bobs. I run my own little coaching. It's not so much a podcast, but a coaching group called the Swim Coach Network. We've got 600 or 700 coaches from around the world and we do talks for each other and educate each other and that type of thing. And so that's on Twitter, that's on Facebook, it's on LinkedIn. But if anybody wants to find me, just type my name in and either put in swimming coach or triathlon coach or whatever, and you'll find me on there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Russ. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and find out all about your views on swimming. And it's really interesting to hear about this transition into triathlon swimming. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate your time, and also thank you for all you do as well, because I'm slowly going through all your back episodes of podcasts, and it's really educating me, and I'm really enjoying it. So thanks for all you do as well, Michael.
All right. Well, if you go
a real privilege.
If you go far enough back in the archives, you'll find Malcolm Brown there, who you mentioned.
Absolutely.
And that was one of my really early interviews with one of the greats of the sports from my perspective. So that one is worth checking out.
Great stuff. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I hope that you enjoyed that episode. As always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com with links to social media profiles and also some related episodes, including the one that I mentioned with Malcolm Brown, the founder of the Leeds Triathlon Centre and longtime coach of the Brownlee brothers. Also, a more recent episode with British swim coach Ian Armiger that we had on in episode 263, and some other swim-related episodes as well. Marcel Vuda, open water swim coach from the Netherlands, and a link to the archives with all swimming related episodes. Remember that on scientifictriathlon.com, on the podcast episodes page, you can filter for different categories, so you can see separately all running related episodes, swimming, cycling, strength, nutrition, and so on and so forth. So check out the website if you have a specific topic that you're learning about. And another thing that I want to mention is that now, as we're approaching that time where we're starting to look towards 2022 and what goals we want to set for ourselves and how we can achieve them, now is as good a time as any, maybe the best time of all, I would say, to start working with a good coach that can help support you through that journey and to achieve those goals. And I want to mention that if you are looking for a coach, we pride ourselves on the coaching that we're doing and the dedication and commitment we have to our athletes' success. So if you're in the market for a coach, do check out our coaching page on scientifictriathlon.com, learn more about how it works, about our coaches, and get in touch, and you can have a chat with us and see if it seems like a good fit. All right, and finally, thank you to our sponsor, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Go and take a free online sweat test to get a personalized hydration strategy for your next race, and use their quick carb calculator to get fueling guidelines for racing and training. You can get 15% off your first order with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka that you can find on Roka.com. Check out their wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses, and get 20% off your order with the promo code that you can get on Roka.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.